but is actually a British industry and it's a British invention.
Well, fantastic.
So
We can't feed ourselves, we can't clothe ourselves, we can't put roofs over our heads, but we can build lava lamps. That's fantastic.
Always the
tomatoes are overrated.
Yeah, who needs tomatoes? We've got this level of red.
Well, now with the new Northern Ireland agreement, I'm into turnip smuggling. It's very profitable and very easy now.
Welcome everybody to another Sunday Roast, and we've got an excellent list of guests in front of us right now. So can we just get straight into it? Gemma, would you like to introduce yourself to all of our guests who should know who you are, but just in case they don't?
Well, there's a massive chance they won't. My name is Jemma Forte, and I have a podcast myself called The Trawl with Marina Purkis. And am I a political commentator? It's a funny label, isn't it? I wang on telly. That's what I prefer to say. Do things like Jeremy Vine and Sky Papers and whoever will have me, really. You know, apart from GB News, where it's a fat no. Time and time again, it's a fat no from me.
Oh, you've been asked to go on.
Of course, yeah. They're desperate for lefties. Yeah.
Are they? Ooh,
yeah.
Interesting. They have not. Yeah. They've not knocked on my door.
No, and they offered a lot of money. And I can see, the money's kind of like gone up, and they've actually stopped asking now. But there was a point where it was weekly.
Wow, like just
do you want to come on and talk about X, Y, and Z, and like on the different shows? But like that was my line is I don't want to be on there because I think they platformed some let's say some hate. They had Kelvin McKenzie the other day saying that the SAS should come out and just shoot smugglers.
We should take some of our troops and we should head towards France and say we are going to actually invade the northern sands of France and shoot dead the smugglers.
Many of them, multiple. That's what he said on that platform.
And they didn't get pulled up.
No.
A lot of people
complaints to Ofcom about that.
I hope so. And then various conspiracy theories and various other things that I have found problematic.
Wow, I'm really blown away. Well, should I be blown away by that? You all seem like this is obvious.
No. Do you know what? That particular clip. Sorry, promoting my own podcast, but in a couple of episodes' time that's coming out at the weekend. We've put that clip in. I was horrified. I mean, that was a new low for me. So, yeah, it's pretty shady. And I think the more desperate they get for viewers, the lower they will go. And the only positive I can think is it kind of scoops up a certain type and sort of puts them in one place, watching telly. But
didn't they lose £30 million last year? Something like that.
I think so. But I think the people that fund it, the people who fund it have got extraordinarily deep pockets.
Richard, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi. My name is Richard Hewison. I'm the leader of the Rejoin EU party. And I have to say I'm almost the opposite to Gemma when it comes to media, because the only place I ever get invited to go is GB News. And like Gemma, I've had to think quite hard about whether to do it. But I come back to the fundamental principle at the end of the day that unless you talk to the people who disagree with you, you can't always make progress. And whilst I love going to party meetings where all we do is disagree about font sizes and where logos should appear and that sort of thing, and it's lovely and friendly. But yes, I have to confess I do go on GB News. Unlike Gemma, they don't even offer me bus fare, let alone for actually going on. But also, I find it's I'm never more stumped than when I come to listen to some of the bizarre arguments that are put to me when I'm on GB News. And sometimes I have to think, you're kidding me, right? You're really going with that particular view. But it does expand my mind to a certain extent where I have to review all of my assumptions. And every time I've done, one thing I love, I always come out of those GB News things thinking, did they have a point? Was there an issue there? And when I run it through in my mind, it just reinforces me that no, They're there to promote hatred and a narrow agenda. A lot of the commentators, I won't say the presenters, but a lot of the commentators I speak against on GB News, that is what they are there to do. So it reinforces me. And at the end of the day, I also see it as no lose because nobody watches it anyway. So,
and also, Richard, good for you. That is the argument to go on. And I don't ever judge anybody for the choices that they make if they are singing from a great hymn sheet. You know what I mean? As long as you're saying stuff that is cool.
No, but it's a really interesting debate here, Gemma, and I totally get what you're saying there about not speaking to these people. My worry is, and it kind of goes into obviously the Lineker story as one of the big ones of the week in terms of that. I feel that a lot of society is pushing us not to talk about certain issues, which we really should be talking about. So actually speaking to these people and trying, even if they do try and edit me to look like a Muppet on there, I don't mind, because at least we're taking the fight to them to a certain extent.
You see, I would take issue with that, and I've had that done. I don't want to be edited and manipulated like that. No.
No, I'm joking.
In fairness, the live
we edit this a little
bit.
bit.
It's the bits that get edited afterwards that are
the clips.
Yeah. And the great thing is there's a certain person called Mr. Alex Kerr who gets everything that comes out from lefties on that and makes sure that it's never re-edited without there being a reference copy. And Alex, I think you do an amazing job on that.
Oh, thank you. Well, we do. I don't know what the term is. I know what it is in Twitter, which is ratioed. But whenever we put up videos on the Rejoin EU party, we get bigger numbers than GB News, which is just awesome on so many levels. You did do a very good job of dispatching John Redwood. I'd never seen him sort of crossly mumble insults before. That was a new one for me.
I have to say, I'm quite surprised to hear John say there about being willing to enforce EU rules on goods going into Ireland, because that doesn't sound like Brexit at all to me. And indeed, if John's considering changing parties and would like to join us, that sounds like exactly the sort of thing we're pushing for. And this is not Brexit.
I have to admit, he started off by just saying how stupid I was. And I thought he was going to end up just calling me a stinky poo face and walking off crying at one stage. It was quite... But one of the interesting things about that bit with John Redwood is, obviously, on GB News' site, you get a lot of hate in the chat usually, and a lot of very personal comments. And after that, I looked at it and go, oh, let's see what they say this time. And I noticed that there was still a lot of negative comments, but the negative comments were against Brexit and how it was missold, rather than against me personally. And of course, that's what I was arguing with John Redwood, that after 7 years of utter failure, he'd failed to deliver, and we were getting fed up with it. And I don't think any of the people in the chat would have said, oh, I agree with that, Blake. But it was quite clear that it was more hatred for the lies that have been told to people and the way they've been misled than for the lefty Remainer wokerati snowflakes such as myself on their service, which I thought was interesting.
Isn't wokerati just another word for empathy?
Well, to me, woke means trying to take time to understand the issues and perspectives of other people that are not yourself. So, quite frankly, if you're not woke, then you're a horrible person.
Yeah.
And over to my co-host.
Hi, everyone. My name is Max. I run the Robespierre channel where I talk about politics and Brexit. I just want to talk, just before we bring in Alex and get Alex to introduce yourself, I think it's something interesting that both of you brought up about how, you know, going on to the likes of GB News. I think Bernie Sanders received a lot of criticism back in 2020 when he went on Fox News. And they were expecting, Fox News, they're going to destroy Bernie Sanders. They're going to hand his arse back to him. But in reality, he got a lot of support. Now, I'm not saying that, Jemma, you should go on GB News, but from a political, from a politician like Richard, maybe there's an opportunity to, as you said, to reach out to people who maybe who've never heard of you or never heard of your platform. And maybe I'm going off on a bit of a limb here, where a few months back, Keir Starmer wrote an article in The Sun, and he got a lot of flack for that. Is that so? I'm probably more on the side of Richard here, because you're a politician. You want to promote the Rejoin EU party. You want to get as many people to hear your message as possible. But was it right for Keir Starmer to write an article in The Sun considering what the Sun has done over the last number of years? And
Alex,
oh, sorry, go on,
Alex,
Gemma.
you go. Well, no, I think absolutely. Just for the PM in waiting, he's got to go Daily Mail. He's got to go. He's got to tap into as many people as possible. I mean, I totally. I mean, obviously they boycott the Sun in Liverpool, and I love Liverpool for it. I just think it's wonderful that shit rag isn't there. But I can understand entirely Keir Starmer going in the Sun. But what I don't understand, and what I do take umbrage with, is Jeremy Hunt choosing GB News to talk about his budget with two Conservative MPs, which is completely against Ofcom regulations. Sorry, Jeremy Hunt, you're going where? Like, they don't have a huge amount of viewers. He could have gone BBC, just a thought, ITV, Channel 4, Sky. You've gone to GB News and you're being interviewed by Esther McVeigh and what's he called? Phil Daniels, like another, I think he's called another two Conservative MPs, two Tories. It's like, and John Nicholson brought this up with some regulator from Ofcom.
I was just having a look at the rules that Ofcom has over how and why and when politicians can work as interviewers. No politician may be used as an interviewer or a reporter in any news programmes unless exceptionally or editorially justified. And then I look at a tweet from HM Treasury. Tomorrow, Chancellor Jeremy Hunt will appear on Saturday morning with Esther and Phil. Esther McVeigh and Philip Davies. They're both Tory MPs. Why are Tory MPs interviewing the Tory Chancellor on a UK channel?
So you're quite right to say that there are strict rules about serving politicians not being able to present news programmes. But aside from that, they are able to present shows and to invite on whoever they like. But of course, due impartiality is going to be needed. And that's
hold on a second. No politician may be used as an interviewer. That's very clear. Fast forward to the next screen.
I believe that's on a news programme.
I take your point. GB News, is hardly a news channel by any normal standards, but I think they would see themselves as a news channel. Your rules say you cannot be an MP and be an interviewer. GB News regards itself as a news channel, and two MPs here are interviewing the Chancellor with HM Treasury tweeting out. How is it possible that they're not breaking the rules?
She was a disgrace. He was like, this is the Ofcom regulations. A politician is not allowed to be interviewed on a news channel by a politician. And she was like, well, it's GB News. And it's like, with the word news in it.
Is she going for the Fox defence where they're suggesting they're entertainment?
It's weak. It's weak. And what are you doing, Jeremy Hunt? Like, what are you doing? And he knows that if he got a half-decent interviewer, they would shred that budget to bits. They'd be asking questions he doesn't want to answer.
True.
Yeah, I think most Tory MPs are doing that at the moment as well. So I can see why he's afraid of them and wants to get them on side. But that's not to disagree with the issue. If we can't even trust the politicians at the top of our government to obey the rules, then why should anyone else in society?
We haven't trusted them for 3 years. I mean, Rishi Sunak lied to us all on camera that he didn't see a party.
No, Mr. Speaker, I did not attend any parties.
And then there's photos that turn up, which has been completely ignored. It's absolutely ridiculous. And it's like, he's broken the law 3 times now, hasn't he? He had a dog, no seatbelt, and he it's like, what on earth is going on? It's like a crap Boris. At least Boris, when he broke the rules, did something so outrageous you're almost slightly entertained. Rishi Sunak's like the dull man's lawbreaker.
It has to be said, though, he's a gift to a certain extent to those of us who've constantly been charged, oh, you're against democracy for opposing Brexit. Here's a man who lost a leadership election, spent the next month undermining the winner, then took the prize anyway without any election with his party, and indeed actively prevented one from happening. So when it comes to leading the way in opposing democratic, I'll put that in brackets for the Conservative Party leadership contest, I think he's certainly got a few interesting lessons to teach the left.
It's like that internet meme where the guy is, coming third place and holding up the trophy.
Yes.
Yeah, I think he's really, I find him being difficult to get the measure of, because I think he's one of the darkest, because yet we all get Johnson, who's just selfish to the core, doesn't care about anything except himself, and his motivation is Boris Johnson, and he'll just say whatever, like a windsock, to make his day go well. But with Rishi Sunak, he's got this sort of, when he first came in, I was just relieved. Obviously, Liz Truss sort of left us all lying on the floor, sort of gasping like that. So it was like, okay, we've got a grown up, and as somebody who is completely anti this government, I still wanted, for the sake of my kids' future and the country, him to come in and wield some sense and be a grown up. And it looked like that was going to be the case until he put Suella Braverman in the Home Office. And I thought, oh, hello, there's no appeasement going on here. There's no trying to unite. There's no trying to govern for all. And actually, since then, my opinion of him has gone lower and lower and lower, because he appears to be this sort of polished, like, nice guy. This immigration policy is disgusting. Like, you weren't one of the people who came out and said that unaccompanied children shouldn't be detained. So who are you, Rishi Sunak? What do you stand for? What do you care about? What do you want your legacy to be? I can't figure out why he's okay to be associated with this tawdry
stuff. He had to, didn't he? He had to get both sides of the party united. So that's why he's brought in Jeremy Hunt from one side, and he's brought in Braverman and a couple of the others from the other side, in order to hate everyone, to make it look like, tough on immigration.
And without backing Suella Braverman, he couldn't have got the job. So it's weak. That's the reason he's got the Chancellor he's got. That's the reason he's got the Home Secretary he's got. He's in no position to do anything about it. And I have to admit, I kind of agree with Gemma. It's quite hard to know what Sunak is. And in my personal opinion, I think he's just a greedy, vacuous airhead who wants the job of Prime Minister and has no real insight into how to run the country, apart a few soundbites. I mean, the speech he gave about the Northern Ireland Agreement, espousing how wonderful being part of the EU was.
About Northern Ireland, that is the prize that is on offer. Because if we get this right, if we get this framework implemented, if we get the executive back up and running here, Northern Ireland is in the unbelievably special position, unique position in the entire world, European continent, in having privileged access, not just to the UK home market, which is enormous, 5th biggest in the world, but also the European Union single market. Nobody else has that. No one. Only you guys, only here. And that is the prize. I can tell you, when I go around the world and talk to businesses, they know that. They're like, that's interesting. If you guys get this sorted, then we want to invest in Northern Ireland, because nowhere else does that exist. That's like the world's most exciting economic zone. And one of the things that is top of Secretary of State's in tray, once we get an executive up and running here, is to work with companies not just in the UK but around the world to figure out how do we get them to come and invest in new things to take advantage of Northern Ireland's very special position. And they are queuing up to do so, particularly from the US, actually. They keep talking to us, say, when are you going to get this thing sorted? Because we've got all these ideas. We've got investment that we want to bring, just like Mars is doing with Coca-Cola. That's what we need more of, and that is the prize, and that is the potential that we're going to realise.
I mean, my jaws only just come up off the floor from that.
Yeah, the Windsor framework. Yeah, so he has the intelligence enough to do all the manipulating, and to, he obviously appears, he's obviously easier to negotiate with. He's not sort of outwardly rude to the EU, and he can bring old King Charles in, give it a bit of kudos. All of that stuff is quite clever politicking. But then you're right, then he stands there talking like he's on CBeebies, he's going, hey guys, we've got this great deal and it's really special. And you just think, what are you talking about?
He's like an arsonist talking about fire safety. It's like this whole thing of and the way he presents it, like a middle manager who's given a job for the day to motivate the sales team or something like that.
And if he had a moral compass, I hear what you're saying, Richard, about his cesspit of a party and having to sort of, manage them. But actually, if he had the kahunas, like the ERG really, quite frankly, need to be managed at this point. And he knows there's going to be an election soon. He knows that there's a huge chance that they will lose. He could have just really grown a set and been like, no, sorry. Like, we've pandered to you for too long. And perhaps for the sake of the greater good. And he might have got more support overall. But by pandering to them permanently, I think it's just toxic.
It's interesting because Boris Johnson and Cummings obviously went to that election and then just had the ability to clear house and just were like, right, we're not going to have anyone that isn't supporting us, and we'll just kick them out. And it makes me wonder if that's going to happen with Rishi in the election. But all the polls are showing, or at one stage they were showing, I wonder if it's different now, and we'll segue into some other stuff in a second. But the polls were showing that he's probably going to get, or was going to get, 10 to 20 seats total, which would be, that would be interesting, because that would mean that the Lib Dems are opposition, which is just like
probably
what?
the opposition
And the
based on
SNP.
current polls. I think
So
the current polls are showing them very close together in seats, which would be interesting.
And Reform are going to take votes away from the Conservatives because they're just going to galvanise their far-right agenda.
Well, I think the far right are probably sort of fairly happy with the Conservatives, aren't they?
I don't
don't
think they
know.
are, because they view them as incompetent. And don't forget, if you are of extreme right-leaning and you think Brexit should have solved all of your problems, and the only problem is that this stupid government didn't deliver what you voted for, then no, you're not going to be satisfied.
Okay,
with them.
yeah.
I think Reform are going to tap into that very, very well.
Well, they'll probably have a policy of having the SAS go on French beaches and shoot up all the boats, won't they? I mean, that seems to be what the far right want. And it's interesting because that got brought up in a question time during COVID, where we had the incident with Jersey, and the BBC allowed someone to get on to the panel who's into the audience and say something to the effect of, we should have sent the gunboats down there to blow up the French fishing boats.
What on earth gave the French the right to suddenly start blockading a British port? The only mistake that the Royal Navy made was in not sinking the ships in the first place.
And you're like, there is clearly a group in Britain that are going for old school of sending in the gunboats to deal with our problems. And it's like, that doesn't work. I mean, we've just had a report saying our Navy's absolutely knackered, which isn't too much of a shock, to be honest.
They've tried every single thing apart from being less hostile, more organized, and numbers are going up and up and up and up. And it's just like their stupid ideology is so stupid because it works against them, because you just have so many people arriving by boat when you don't know who they are, because there's no safe processing center, but because they're such numbnuts. The minute anyone sensible goes, oh, hey, you know what, we could just get together with France, as they said in the first place, and we could maybe process them legally and then see what's what. And then actually we've got this massive sort of workforce shortage and have some economic migrants, which is a good thing. I mean, I'm just so bored of being surrounded by these ever sort of more potent sort of failures.
Yeah, I think it has to be the most incompetent government in British history.
Yeah. As
a historian, I can vouch for that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. It's one of, definitely that I've lived through.
Yeah. Yes. So I'm going to plug the Trawl again, because I was listening to it. Yeah, you're welcome. I was going to suggest you brought up in your most recent episode that the Rwanda. I think it was either yourself or Marina brought up that the Rwanda policy has a clause in it to say that if Rwanda takes 200, we've got to take 200 back.
It's reciprocal, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then I'm going, so hasn't that cost us 140 million as well so far? So it's cost us, and then I'll add in this, because I think it's the Democratic Republic of Congo have gone and put in a complaint to the UN saying that Rwanda is sponsoring terrorism in the southern border.
Yeah, they
which is again not being reported in the news.
Yeah, there's massacres happening in the Congo by Rwandans, and James Cleverly, our foreign secretary, silence.
Yeah.
Silence. Because they're like, oh, Rwanda's lovely. It's wonderful. Oh, be absolutely fine.
Rwanda is an incredible country that has a very, very progressive and developed approach in terms of not just how they treat people, but effectively how they are governed and the way in which they are developing their own country in terms of investing in people, skills, their economic development.
And yeah, the idea that it's going to solve anything, and it's bullshit. Yeah, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. It's hugely expensive. It's unworkable, and it's supposed to be a deterrent, and it isn't a deterrent. So it just doesn't work.
It's 200 people that they're saying they're taking, right?
Yeah.
So I'm slightly going, if Rwanda collapses, is that 200 places for the Rwandan government to then claim asylum in the UK? And they're guaranteed 200 places.
I would have thought the Rwandan government would be more concerned about the UK government collapsing at this stage in terms of where we are on that. I have to say, with the Rwanda cans, I totally agree with all the social and economic arguments being made here. I do worry that we miss the moral argument sometimes with Rwanda, because let's remind ourselves what we're doing at the end of the day. We are effectively trying to round up a group of people that share a characteristic that our government thinks is undesirable and put them into an isolated location. Now, I think you know what term defines what I'm describing there, and it gets us back to some of the things that Gary Lineker was talking about previously. And these are the sort of signs that I think we cannot ignore within our society's moral fabric. And I think it needs to be called out. And so, again, I know we spent a lot of time talking about Gary Lineker so far, but I think Gary Lineker has done us a service by opening up the right to talk about, I'm going to call it fascism rather than Nazism, because I think Nazism is a bit too emotional. But these are some of the warning posts along the way to degenerating into a fascist state. And this is something that I worry about a lot.
We love you, Gary. We love you.
We love Gary so much.
We love
Gary's
Gary.
like poster boy for everything that's decent at the moment, and it's rather refreshing.
A 60-year-old poster boy. He is pretty ripped for a 60-year-old, isn't he? Are we going to get rid of Hail the Lava Lamp and we're going to do for today Hail Gary?
It was so fabulous, though, because, of course, and I know it's been talked about so much, but it just cuts through in the way that Marcus Rashford did when he came out to, you know, really talk about kids getting their dinners. And, you know, there will be, you've got people who are engaged and they are, I love this migrant policy. And you've got people who engage who are like, I hate it. And then you've got swathes of people in the middle who probably not for any reason, just because they're a little bit apathetic or too busy or whatever, who haven't looked into it much. And because of Gary Lineker, everybody now will know a lot more about it. And I was out with my daughter last Saturday, looking around a university. And while we were waiting to hear the thing, I could just hear people all over the place sort of talking about Gary Lineker. It was rather wonderful. And sort of trying to keep up with the stuff on the phones because of that brilliant sort of drama of, you know, Shearer dropping out and Ian Wright dropping out and Alex Scott. And you just think, yes.
Trade unions work. Trade unions work. If implemented correctly with the right people, they can actually work. I was going to say Rashford, and then there was also Tyrone Mings, centre back for England in Aston Villa. Yeah. He took on Priti Patel and ratioed the hell out of her, which is interesting. Like I was not expecting that. It doesn't seem like a very good idea to take on footballers. But the worst thing, and I promised Max I'm going to bring you in next because you did have a point. The worst thing that seems to come out of it is this attitude from the government that if you're a footballer, you shouldn't have a say in politics. And it's like, right, one, they pay taxes. In fact, they probably pay more taxes than the government does because the government takes it all offshore. And it was interesting with GB News that you brought up earlier, who's in charge. It's a company called Legatum, which most of the board of directors aren't British, which most people don't know. And there are a couple of Tory MPs on that board of directors as well, which most people don't know. But the majority are based abroad, and the company's based abroad. And it's interesting that they go and slag off companies like the BBC, which are based in the UK and sponsored by taxpayers, versus Legatum. And it's interesting you brought up about GB News. Why have we got politicians taking the side of private companies and attacking the BBC? I'm going to stop. Max, you obviously want to bring in.
You know, yeah, I just wanted to talk earlier on about Rwanda and how they describe it as both a deterrent and a wonderful place. They were talking about how it was a wonderful place, and then I had to respond. Then why don't you send people to Canada instead? Canada's a wonderful place, but then it's not a deterrent. So which is it, a deterrent or a wonderful place? But maybe we can move on to Brexit. Well, what's everyone's take on Brexit? Maybe Richard, how's Brexit going at the moment?
Well, we touched upon it earlier on. There does seem to have been a bit of a sea change in Brexit life after the Northern Ireland proposals by the government, particularly Rishi's speech that we referred to earlier on, saying what a wonderful place the EU was to be and how fantastic it would be to be in Northern Ireland trading it. And there's good news and there's bad news on this. I feel a lot of people are now feeling that there's subliminal signals are being sent out, that the Tory party is about to go into full reverse in terms of Brexit, and a lot of suggestions that we won't call it rejoining, but we'll make sure that we end up with a Brino, but we won't call it Brino, Brexit in name only. And I think it's a little bit early for that. And it goes back to what we were saying earlier on about Rishi Sunak. I just think it's because he's not particularly focused on what he's saying, rather than it's a deep philosophical analysis by the Conservative Party. But of course, this does leave Labour pretty much high and dry, because if the Conservatives do soften on Brexit, then Labour will be the only significant party that is now calling for Brexit to be fully implemented. And that puts us in a very interesting position for the upcoming election.
What is Brexit?
Brexit.
What is a Brexit? We still don't know. It's so shit. It's just so bollocks. I mean, it's like, what has Brexit done? Nothing, except make everything crap. It's such a nonsense. And this is the thing now, the people who were lied to and the people who voted for it with such a big range of reasons, most of them are like, well, either just like I was lied to, so I'm now against, or they're like, yeah, sneaky suspicion that I've maybe got this one wrong. And then you've got the ones who are clinging onto it. They're like, no, because I just didn't get the Brexit. You know, the Brexit that we were supposed to get. And it's like, what is that? No, the one that, you know, the really good one. That's it. That's the problem. It's bloody Keir Starmer's fault. No, it's Corbyn's fault because we didn't get why you had an 80-seat majority. Yeah, but no, if only they what? Well, it would be amazing. It was never going to be amazing. It's bollocks. We've been sold a turd, and it has hammered our economy, and we don't have enough workers, and you know, we've lost a lot of international standing, and we don't have unfettered access to this massive trading bloc that are right next door. We haven't done all these amazing trade deals that were promised. America couldn't give a shit, and China are busy taking over the rest of the world, and we've stuffed it. We have stuffed it, and it is so sad. And the NHS is suffering, which everybody said would happen as well. And we just look like idiots, and we've done this to ourselves, and we don't have as much investment coming in. And all of this was then sort of stated by Sunak when he gave Northern Ireland what we had before. Unfettered access to the EU, but without freedom of movement. Well, big bloody deal. And then it was all about controlling your borders, was it? Well, we've got more people coming over than ever before. So, sorry, that's my view on Brexit. I'll calm down now. Love it, really love it.
So you're a bit on the fence, are you, Gemma, on this one?
Yeah, I've got like Brexit bikini, I've got Brexit hat, I've got little Brexit bunting. Love it, really like it. And when we have anniversaries, I'm like, yay, Brexit! I'm out there with Julie Hartley-Brewer in a big Union Jack dress, having a great time, drinking English pissy wine. Oh, I love it.
Turnip wine.
Fucking hell. It feels like those TV programs where they go and try and find the Loch Ness Monster or Bigfoot, and they get to the end of the program, the end of the week, and they're like, tune in next week and you will definitely see the Bigfoot monster.
Yeah.
Like, or it's more a bit like a big bullseye. Remember?
I don't believe it. I don't believe it. Just down the side. Have a look at what you could have won.
Bullseye from the 1980s, where you know they'd be like, "This is what you could have won. This is what you could have had. You could have had a speedboat, even though you live on the the 19th floor of a tower block." But it's like, for example, just there recently there was an interview with the Treasury Secretary, not the Secretary of State, but it was one of the secretaries or ministers in the Treasury, guy who shares a name with the famous astronaut John Glenn. But he was asked about, people are now poorer because of Brexit. And he didn't say, no, that's not true. He said, yeah, but people got to vote.
You haven't mentioned Brexit. The OBR hasn't changed its view on its assessment of Brexit. Perhaps that is one of the reasons why we're different compared to other G7 nations. They still say, the OBR, that there will be a 4% long-term hit to our economy, even with all the things that you have announced today. Isn't it time to be honest with people about that?
Well, we gave people a choice. That decision was made 7 years ago. I think most people want...
But people didn't vote to be poorer, did they?
They made a choice, and we as a government are now taking advantage of all the opportunities that we can.
Do you think people voted to be poorer, yes or no?
I think people made a decision around a range of factors.
Do you think they voted to be poorer, honestly?
I think people were given a choice and they made a decision. My job as Chief Secretary is to work with the Chancellor to do the best I can whilst I'm in office today.
So they're actually now at the stage where they're not denying the damage of Brexit. They're just saying, yeah, well, we gave people a vote, so it's their fault. So
this message has gone down. There's ordinary Brexit voters saying, yes, I know I'm financially worse off, but it's worth it for sovereignty.
Just ask them, what does sovereignty mean? And then it's like...
I love it. Love a bit of sovereignty. Yeah, it's really sad, and sometimes I get like Brexity men on Twitter sort of go, oh, get over it, and I think no, I don't want to. I'm going to remain fed up about it. Piss off. It's like it's my. I don't see that on Twitter. I just mute them. But yeah, I find it really sad. Okay, here's an example, just one little everyday story. So my daughter is working her really hard at the moment in their A-levels, right? And she would like to, I think I mentioned we went to see some universities at the weekend. We went to Bristol University. She was looking around. It was like wide-eyed, like, can I get the grades to get in here? Don't know. It's on the fence at the moment. There's this really lovely girl showing us around. We were chatting a bit. Lovely girl. And she originally comes from Norwich. Very bright. And I said, what do you study? And she said, well, I'm doing French and I'm doing something else and something else. And she said, and as part of the degree, we get to go and live in France, but it's just a bit stressful at the moment because we've got to get visas and it's all a bit of a nightmare. And blah, blah, blah. And I just thought, it's another Brexit benefit. Yeah. Just loads of shitty admin and hassle. And
for no reason.
For no reason. No tangible reason.
It's amazing, isn't it? Because out of those promises, they promised better schools, better universities, better investment for the sciences, better investment for the economy, a bigger economy, a better NHS.
But can I just say,
reduce migration?
Yeah, but there's also another thing that it's important to remember what they said at the time. When issues like what Gemma brought up were presented to people like Michael Gove, they said, no, the French won't impose visa restrictions on us because they need us more than we need them. So there was always this, he used the same thing when it came to people who have holidays abroad. Like they were like, will I be able to actually go and stay in my summer house?
Spanish villa. Yeah.
Spanish villa.
No.
Like Andrew Neil. Not Andrew Neil's in France, sorry. But it's can I do that? And his response, no, don't worry. Why? Because they need us more than we need them. So there was this belief will override bureaucracy.
It was British exceptionalism, wasn't it? It's like, we are so marvellous. German car industry. Oh, God, no, they're desperate for us. Everybody. We are British. We have spent hundreds of years marching into countries. We're a very small little island, but we go where we want. And we march in and we spread ourselves around. Take you, Commonwealth, lovely. So we can do what we want. That's the vibe.
Is it ironic that the thing that we did and they extol as a brilliant thing, the British Empire, they now don't like happening over here? Except that they're not stealing resources, they're not they're not changing democracy, they're just all trying to work. I mean, there was one statistic I saw the other day suggesting that out of the refugees that have come over, there are 500 doctors.
Who are not allowed to work because of their status.
Yes.
So, and I'm glad you mentioned that, Alex, because one thing that does concern me about this whole immigration debate, again, we talk about the economics back and forth, and no one makes the positive case for immigration, why we actually need immigration in this country. And I'm happy to make it from an economic point of view. Just remind people, number one, we have a reproductive rate of 1.75 in this country, meaning that with average attrition, for every 6 people there are today, there'll be 5 people in the next generation if nothing happens. Number 2, we have a demographic time bomb represented by people like me in our late 50s who are about to go into retirement and just hopefully benefit from the work of the younger people. And number 3, in order to make up that gap, we need approximately 300,000 to 400,000 people to just appear from nowhere in order to do that. So we need immigration in this country from an economic point of view. As well as from a cultural point of view, I think it enriches our lives, doesn't it? To mix with people that are not just like ourselves every day. I love the fact that on my street, I don't think there's one single house which is entirely people born in England, Scotland and Wales. It's a very, very mixed community, and I think that's very, very useful. So immigration is a positive thing, and we need to welcome and celebrate people that immigrate, even if they're not refugees. We need economic migrants.
Sorry, I just want to say, I don't believe for a second that Richard is in his late 50s. I was thinking 35.
Love you for that, Max. Love you for that. The check's in the post.
I prefer a PPE contract, but that'll do.
I've been a geek again, a historian geek, and I've gone off and nerded up about the Japanese economy. It's interesting you've just brought up about the economy over here and that the demographics going down. But basically, yes, that is the biggest problem. We all need to be having children. And we all had 2 children. That's what, or 3, really, ideally. Some of us need to have 3 children. Now, Boris and his dad have both helped on that, although ironically, Boris's dad has also talked about shrinking the population to 15 million. But yeah,
and Boris is like Robert Baratheon when it comes to children. You know, there are so many, we don't even know how many there are.
We do. The one point that people make that is valid is we don't have the infrastructure, not just for the people who are coming over on dinghies, but for anybody. That is a valid point. Like, they need to build social housing desperately, affordable housing. We have a supply and demand problem, and they haven't built anything. So they do need, and I don't know why Labour aren't talking about that more.
Oh, I can answer that. So again, being a nerd, I found out we're short of 4.3 million in housing. We need to be building 500,000 a year to be able to keep up. We are building between 200 and 300,000.
Yeah.
And the core crux of the problem is twofold. One, the Tories are highly backed by landlords. And the other part of the problem is that the Tories have pushed for this policy of everyone owning homes. And as a result of that, let's put it this way, we can actually accelerate our building program with 3D printing, which a lot of people are very skeptical over. And I don't understand as to why, because I've looked and researched. These houses are damn decent, and you can build up to a 5-story 3D printed house. You can build 2 stories in a week. At the moment, a 2-story house would, building from scratch probably takes 6 months to 8 months.
Yeah.
If you can shrink that down with 7, that's with 7 workers. You can build a 2-story house in a week. Now, that's not including the interior. That is literally the external structure. But you'll have a livable, in theory, you'll have a somewhat livable house within a week, which is crazy. But we're not doing that. Now, the Sultan of Brunei is saying he wants 50% of housing to be developed through 3D printing by 2030. We're not doing that. And it then goes back to that thing. Imagine if we suddenly ramped up house building from 200 to 300,000 a year to, let's say, 1 million. What would that do to mortgages? What would that do to house? Yeah. And then we've got a bigger problem, and this is again goes back to Japan. One of the reasons they've had a massive crash is their demographic. And it's always been an interest. My dad's always said, always buy land, buy house. There's always a shortage of land. You can't have more land. But the problem with that theory is you need more people. If you suddenly have a shrink in population sizes, then you don't need as much housing and you don't need as much land, which is what pretty much most of the world's going through at the moment. China, this is why I think China's going to collapse, because they are short of about 100 million people because they had the one-child policy. Russia has done this push into Ukraine because they can see their population shrinking. And we've got the same problem over here, which is why it was so good having this net immigration coming in from the EU. The problem was, as you said, Gemma, they didn't want to do anything in terms of construction. And we're seeing that with this. So there is a solution. They aren't pushing it forward. And part of it is down to the fact that they've created this policy that is going to come back and bite us in the backside if we go through with it and go on this massive build and set a target of 1 million houses, even though we're short by 4 million.
Is it down to NIMBYism?
There certainly is a big element of that. You only have to talk to people on the street in an election to find that particular thing out. What people are in favour of in general, they're definitely not in favour of in their own area. That is certainly a big factor. And I mean, Alex is absolutely right, but fundamentally it comes down to two things. Number one, do we have the people to do it? If only there was a source of fit, young, working age people that was just flowing into the country, able to help us. That's difficult to solve. And number two, do we have the financial infrastructure to fund it? And we've just had the budget this week where Jeremy Hunt tells us he's now going to boost our economy by putting corporation tax up from 19 to 25%. And apparently that's going to encourage people of my age back into work to do things. I can tell you what it's encouraging me to do with my company. It's encouraging me to get as much work done as I can by March the 31st at 19%, and then put my feet up for a year at 25% because he tells us it's going to come down after that. So in terms of getting the foundation and fabric in place for an economic recovery, I don't really think this does it.
So we could compare that with what the Abbey economics does.
Oh, now that's an entrance.
Prime Minister of Japan, Shinzo Abe.
So his economic policy was to do a huge public works program, borrow more, lend more, encourage the banks to do that, quantitative easing, which we've talked about in this program before. But he also opened up immigration to Japan. And Japan is, from what I've read and listened to by my namesake, Alex Kerr, who writes about Japan and what goes on over there, as well as like a number of other people I've read, Japan is a little bit hostile to the outsiders, shall we say. There are certain clubs that you cannot go in unless you're Japanese. Even if you have a Japanese passport, but you don't look Japanese, you can't get access to it.
For example, and I don't know if this has changed, but some years ago, for sure, if you were from Korean descent, so if your parents were Korean, but you were born in Japan, you would be denied a job in the public sector.
Wow.
Because of what happened with Korea in the past.
So, Abby, that's great. Lovely Japan. If you look at GDP per person under Abbey economics, actually they do really well from all of his public policies, except they have stagnation still for about a 10-year period, a decade, called the lost decade. We're heading into a double lost decade, which is crazy because we only just started recovering from 2008, 2016. Then we had Brexit, and that knackered the economy again. And we're still stuck in this perpetual loop of not being able to get out. I can see by 2028, not much is going to change. We'll have stagnation. But the key indicator was the only thing they could figure out, most economists could figure out with Japan, not having enough kids. And to rectify that problem, I can only think of a couple of countries from the 1930s, won't name which, that tried to, and had a somewhat successful birthing policy. But you've got to have more kids. No country that I'm aware of since that have been able to encourage the population to have more children. China, Russia, Japan have not been successful. The same problem.
Italy, because I'm based in Italy, so and they did try to do something similar some years ago. But the problem with that was that there's no infrastructure in place for childcare. And I was just listening to LBC there the other day, where there was a caller who phoned into Nick Ferrari, I think it was, and they were saying that in London today, to keep, and maybe Gemma, you can confirm this, but it's like £1,300 a month to keep a child in childcare for 5 days a week.
I'm delighted to say I don't have to think about childcare anymore, thank Christ. My kids are 18 and 16, but what I do know is that it's extortionate in this country. I think we're second to Switzerland, and it is a massive, massive issue. And actually, because I'm the kind of person that votes not just based on my own wants and needs, like a proper Tory, I personally believe in voting for whatever party is going to do the best for the whole of society, because then that's good for me too. I think that the childcare issue has to be tackled. But what Jeremy Hunt has announced has so many holes in it. So when I first looked at it, I thought, oh, great. And I think there's been a lot of campaigning by people like Mother Pucker and various other associations saying, this has to change, like, because also there's a massive gender imbalance. Like, women still carry the can for childcare. They just do. So anyway, he's announced this free childcare for whatever it is. I don't know the exact thing, but it's not going to kick in for a long time. And then what the nurseries are saying is that you have to fund it. You have to fund these free places, and they haven't. So it's about 8 billion worth of places, and they're putting about 4 billion in. So the nurseries are like, well, we won't be able to take them on. And then the Tories' way of doing it is like, well, you can afford it if you have less staff. So what you do, fire some of your staff, and then you've got one staff for 5 children or whatever versus whatever it was before, 4 or something, or 3. I can't, again, the details I'm not 100% on. So that is dangerous. And that is shit for the people that work there, because it's already a completely exhausting job and challenging. And it's not the way to solve it. No, you don't make it less safe and less pleasant to work in that environment. These people don't get paid that much anyway, and you've got to fund it properly. So they haven't really solved anything. But also, it also goes back to this sort of incentivize, because we just need workers so desperately. We've only got 3% in unemployment, which is bad. The ideal for any country is about 5%, because you're always going to have about 5% of people in any population who are disabled or and can't work with their particular disabilities or whatever. So we're desperate. So we're like, ladies, you've had a C-section, tough shit. Fling that placenta on the ground, you're going into work.
So how much does it cost you to have 2 children here in daycare? Like, how much per hour?
Oui, environ 1 euro par heure. C'est rien, quoi.
So how many weeks of paid vacation or
minimum 5 weeks?
5 weeks? Minimum of 5 weeks.
That's the French law. Once you work for a large company, you get sometimes 8, 10 weeks.
Remembering that there is a 35-hour week.
The productivity rate is so high here.
Yeah, I read that it was higher than the United States.
Yeah, they're relaxed.
If they're working more than 35 hours a week, they'll get extra days off.
Employees as well.
You get 5 weeks paid vacation even if you're a part-time employee?
Everybody.
If you get married, the year you get married, you get like an extra week or an extra 7 days for your honeymoon. In addition to your 5 weeks. When my daughter was 3 months old, there was this free service that will send somebody to your home to give you tips on what to do with your child, how to get them to sleep every single day.
What are you doing?
Mais là, je défie les vêtements que la maman a mis à laver pour que j'aille les tendre dans la salle de bain.
You from the government?
C'est le gouvernement qui m'envoie pour aider les parents.
Does she do anything else?
If I want, yes. She's, of course, taking care of the children.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if I ask her to prepare a meal for tonight, she can do it. Mm-hmm. Don't have any associations, nothing to help like that?
No. Nobody from the government comes to your home in America and does your laundry for you if you're a new mother.
It's difficult.
Yeah.
Or old people? No, stick with it. You've got pensions. They're just trying anything to. Sorry, that was really gross what I just said. Apologies. But that's at the core of it. But again, it isn't thought out and it isn't done properly.
Jeremy Hunt speaks Japanese, doesn't he? Fluently. He got a little bit famous for that. And I wonder how much is taken from the Japanese Abe economics policy of trying to get the population up. And they can't do anything about migration. So the only solution is that. I also found out the reason why those bills are 1,000 to 1,300 is because it been, as you said, Gemma, it been so underfunded at the other end that the childcare centres had to charge the 1 and 2 year olds, and that's why the prices have gone up. And again, how are you going to have this like scientific revolution if you're not investing in education in our children?
And they haven't sold. There aren't enough nursery places. So I know that any friends of mine who are a bit younger and at the stage of popping out the sprogs, they're on the waiting list when the child is in the belly. They're trying to get a nursery place sorted out. But we also know that if you look globally, like who does this best, it's all the Scandi countries. They are just leading the way on this. And in terms of also sorting out the gender imbalance, so for instance, men get proper paternity leave, so do women, and they get a lot longer and it's paid a lot more. And so what you get then is choice. You get better health, you get less stress, people making these very emotional decisions about how they want to play it and what they want to do and who's going to do it. And then that, the problem is what we've had a government for so long now who have just ruled by austerity, by cutting everything and making everything worse and then paying people less. But actually, it's, from my mind, a totally false economy, because now we're seeing the consequences of that. And in people struggling, they end up relying more on public services that now don't exist. You know, there isn't any mental health, really, care. There isn't really any great social care. So it's so sad. And yeah, what a sad we're not more progressive and forward thinking when there are examples of other countries doing things really well, but we don't emulate them. I don't think anybody will be emulating us at the moment.
I just want to bring in Richard on that as well, but I just want to say something quickly about it. I think the difference maybe in some of the Scandinavian countries is there's consensus within the political parties. This is important. While maybe when we look at the Tories and we look at the Labour Party may say it's important, but the Conservatives are like, it's not that important, or let's use a sticking plaster. So this is a big, like the political parties in the Scandinavian countries are like, yeah, left or right, it doesn't really matter. We need this is important. This needs to be resolved. Education or childcare, or
it's more cultural, yeah. But also Labour aren't coming out. I mean, they you know, Stella Creasy has been great over this childcare stuff. There's one or two MPs who are really strong on it. But overall, like, where are your big plans? You know, I just feel like at this point, because they're still being very cautious and still pandering on everything, including Brexit. And I just feel they keep missing own goals. You know, the other day there was this march. The strikers were marching, and I tweeted it. I could not believe it was huge. It was as big as the Remain march. And on the same day, they're standing in Parliament. Why isn't Keir Starmer saying, look out the window, look at how people are feeling? So, if you know, I mean, I hope they get in. You know, but why aren't they better?
I couldn't agree with you more there, Gemma. And to me, this really, really feels like an almost exact parallel to 1995. Just to remind you, in 1995, Tony Blair was in the same position as the opinion polls against John Major was now. Everyone could see there was going to be a Labour government. It was just going to be how long it could stretch for. And everyone was saying to Blair, well, why can't you be more radical? Why can't you come out with better ideas? And Blair's attitude was, well, we're going to win, so why rock the boat? And I think we're exactly at that position now. I think Keir Starmer has exactly the same analysis. And I would say that virtually anyone with any ideas whatsoever could lead Labour. If Meghan Markle took over the Labour Party, she would win the next general election, probably with a bigger majority than Keir Starmer, actually. But anyone could lead Labour to victory from where we are now, and a few big ideas could only motivate people. It's not going to put people off. And certainly, if you're looking at some of the traditional Labour ideas, which should be orientated on the NHS, social care, childcare, these are exactly the constituencies we expect Labour to do. And the sad thing is, if you ask someone in the street who's not particularly engaged with politics what they associate the Labour Party with, they'll believe that Keir Starmer's offering things that he's actually not offering. And that is the big sadness of where we are in the electoral cycle. And the other thing I'd say about Keir Starmer, and I know many, many people disagree with me on this, I actually trust him in terms of doing what he says he's going to do if elected, which means if he says he's going to do nothing apart from vacuous pap, that is what he will do in office when he's elected. Now is the time to push Labour to come out with exactly these sort of commitments. Obviously, for me, it would be EU orientated as well, I'd be hoping for as well, because if they don't put it in the manifesto, it won't be delivered on.
Can I just say something quickly and then we'll bring in Alex? I love the idea of Meghan Markle as Prime Minister and Piers Morgan as leader of the opposition.
It'd be exhausting, wouldn't it?
I was just going to echo that with the Tony Blair comment. One of his key things was education, education, education. And I've looked at the Labour education policy. You want decent education. You make sure the kids are fed. You make sure there's 19 kids in the class. I would scrap homework, instantly eradicating a load of problems that doesn't cost you anything. Encouraging teachers, less stress for kids. I'd get rid of all the exams up until the age of 16, 18. You know, those are all vote winners. And I've read their policy. It's crap. It really is crap education. It's not going to do anything with teachers. They can bolster all the wages that they want, but there are core problems within that sector that they're not really dealing with. Go on, Gemma.
Yeah, my kids are doing their GCSEs and A-levels at the moment, and their school years have been awful in terms of the education. The joy of learning has been sucked out. Like the testing, they are so tested. Of course, they had COVID in the middle of it, but yeah, there's a lot that needs to be done. And the curriculum needs to be stripped back. There's too much. And the joy of learning English is gone. Like every single thing they write, they have to remember like 10 quotes for, like little parrots, like wrote. But just writing about why something is great, is not enough. You have to evidence it like a little robot. It's miserable. It's really sad.
Yeah.
It's really sad. That's Gove. That is Gove. Gove did that.
Yeah. Oh yeah, he was awful. Well, they all have been. I mean, from the Tory government, the education policy would be rubbish.
Gavin Williamson.
Phone off.
Sir Gavin Williamson.
With his whip.
The bully.
The chief
Isn't it
whip.
amazing? Like they attack Gary and they give a bully and a couple of people that have been accused of like sexual assault and battery the option of giving a knighthood, and they're like gone on the deep end about Gary Lineker saying your rhetoric, which by the way, a Holocaust survivor, which you also brought up. You brought up in the troll. I'm plugging you again. You brought up in the troll about the Holocaust survivor coming up and saying, "Yeah, your language is like that." And there seems to be this thing within the media of not bringing up the fact that the language is in Mein Kampf. There's no arguing about this. You can literally go into Mein Kampf, Hitler's book, and you will see the word swarm, plague, and invasion all used by Hitler to describe foreigners and the Jewish population. He uses it to describe migrants. It's not like it's.
And he wanted to send that. He wanted to send them to Madagascar.
Yeah. Yes, the Madagascar plan, which ultimately failed because of the outbreak of war. But it's like, well, how's that different? I mean, there are differences because one, they didn't implement it, and two, the implementation would be slightly different. But the policy of we don't want you here, so we're going to ship you out is no different. The UN have come out and criticised the UK. Well, I think we've just been downgraded as well for civics. We were from narrowed. The area to express yourself was narrowed. So now we've been downgraded to the government is actively obstructing people from being able to express themselves through protest and free speech, which is just mind-blowing. And we keep being told we're not heading in the direction of 1930s. We're not heading in the direction of an authoritarian state. And everyone outside of us is going, yes, you are. You're heading in that. Go on,
I
Richard.
think you're right, Alex. And I think there's evidence of this. Let's remind ourselves, after World War II, we, in the form of Attlee and Churchill, were instrumental in setting up the European Human Rights Convention to prevent fascism.
We cannot aim at anything less than the union of Europe as a whole. And we look forward with confidence to the day when that union will be achieved.
What are we trying to do now? Withdraw from that convention. Now, if you set up a convention to prevent fascism, and then a few decades later you try to withdraw it, why would you want to withdraw from a convention that protects you against fascism? And I'm afraid there's not very many good answers there. If you look at the 17 conventions there, none of them are particularly controversial. The right to life, the right not to be tortured, the right not to be made a slave. Well, which of those is our government minded to want to do, to withdraw? And I think that's a shocking sign.
There's a clambering for the death penalty. 40% of Brits in a recent poll were going, yeah, let's get the death penalty, despite Ian Hislop's amazing takedown of Priti Patel, to which she had no logical answer as a response, other than claiming it's a deterrent. I mean, Brexit was meant to be a deterrent. And so it is this perpetual thing of, Brexit was the problem. Being in the EU was the problem, so we'll have Brexit, it'll solve everything. And then you go, okay, so that didn't. We've got to do more then. ECHR, we'll get rid of that. We'll leave that. That'll solve all our problems. And it's like, no, you just don't get it. What you're saying and implicating isn't the problem. It's almost like the government are trying to do victimhood. They're the victims. And that's really narcissistic. I mean, one of the things I'd love to get everyone's opinion as we're coming to the end. Should we have a policy where we check and make sure anyone coming into a party isn't a narcissist or a psychopath with an actual... Because I think more about it on an international level as well. I mean, you wouldn't have Putin, who's clearly a narcissistic psychopath. You wouldn't have Boris Johnson. You wouldn't have Donald Trump. You wouldn't have Bolsonaro. Probably wouldn't have Modi. And I'm going, wouldn't the world be a better place without psychopaths and narcissists coming into parties? I'm not saying the government checks it. I'm saying that individual parties set up checks within their parties. So you could run as an independent, wouldn't be a problem. But I don't know. What's everyone's thoughts on that?
I think it'd be difficult to police. I think it'd be difficult to implement because generally the charismatic figure is the one who rises to the top, generally, not always. And in order to be able to be confident enough to, and I'm not justifying this, I'm just explaining it. In order to arrive at that level, there is a certain requirement of a bit of narcissism. So, you can apply it also to people like Macron. Macron, I believe, is a bit narcissistic, but he's not implementing policies that are like, Bolsonaro, for example, or Berlusconi. So, I think a problem within any sort of group, be it a political party or anything else, the people who rise to the top are generally people who are very confident in themselves and maybe borderline narcissistic or completely off the scale, like Johnson or Trump.
Obama was pretty charismatic. I wouldn't have said that he was on that scale. I mean,
no. So
I'm sure I don't know. He likes his place in history. And I imagine there's a certain amount of motivation and to extend from Alex's point there, I do agree with you, Alex, and I think most democracies can be characterized by game theory to a certain extent, and the famous Nash equilibrium, whereby we in Britain had a nice society whilst both the Tories and the Labour Party were generally nice about people's rights, but each of them knew they could get an advantage over the other party by being horrible bigots. And it was just, when do you actually use to launch that? And of course, the Conservatives with the Brexit manifesto very successfully launched that. And now they've moved us to a disequilibrium where both parties are worse, or we're both worse off, but under both parties' policies than we would have been otherwise. And both parties have now neutralized their advantage. And there is a sad tendency in democracies that are characterized by charismatic leaders to go that way. My solution is to try and come up with a system where people vote for policies rather than people, to try and actually get a system of governance where when you go to the polls, you're voting for a general program. There's not one particular leader who can be this demagogue hypnotizing the population. And of course, the 2019 election was far and away the worst. We had two of the most divisive characters in history as the leaders of the main party. And let's be honest, it might have been on paper been Brexit versus the NHS, but the reality was, who do you despise most of these two individuals?
Can I just say something quickly, and then we'll maybe bring in Jemma? Like, for example, if the leader of the party was not a politician, was not a member of a parliament, that could be a possible solution. So that it's not always, look, I'm voting for the leader of the party and ignoring the policies. You'd be more focused on the policies. So, Jemma?
I think you always go, I think it's an interesting question, but I think you're always going to need leadership in some way, shape, or form. If you look at Zelensky, for instance, and how much Ukraine have had the right leader at the awful time, or however you want to put it. Yeah, of course, in some kind of fantasy world, every single politician would be there just because they want to affect change and because they have lovely, tendencies to, want to help people. But the reality is, it's always going to attract people who are attracted to power, and I don't know how you stop that. I think some of what Richard said was really, really interesting. So many people ask me if why don't you stand, and I just think, yeah, probably because I'm not a psychopath, really. I think they get a lot of abuse, MPs, really good ones as well. So if you look at, and women, oh my God. And then you go a black woman like Diane Abbott. I know she sometimes says really stupid things, but the level of shit that she gets, it's horrifying. So, it would, you've got to be pretty bloody resilient or completely galvanized by the politics to do it. And, not bring it back to me, but for me, I wouldn't stand at the moment because there's not one party that I wholly could believe in and represent. But we need reform. We need reform, full stop. We need to, the House of Lords needs looking at. That is ridiculous and archaic. And, personally, I think we need proportional representation. And I really think that would level things out a lot. And then you could be voting for, I'd probably vote Green. I wouldn't bother at the moment. There's no point. And yes, you'd probably have way more reform MPs, but you'd have way more Green MPs. And I think it would make politics really worth getting involved with as well.
Feels like your vote counts.
Yeah, and then the other thing I have an issue with is the fact that politicians get whipped. It's ludicrous. So, you go into politics because you want to have a say, and then you're just told. So like a lot of Conservatives came out against the abhorrent immigration bill and then bloody voted for it. So it's meaningless.
Yeah.
So there's so many things that I think are problematic. Can you wield out all the psychopaths? I doubt it. I think 1 in 100 people do have psychopathic tendencies, obviously not to kill, but like in business, apparently, I read somewhere, if you look at CEOs and like people who really lead, a lot of people have. So that's nice.
I think what you said about the whipping system is very relevant as well, because in actual fact, I think you're right, Gemma. The whipping system actually promotes psychopathic behaviour because it's in the interest of the Conservative and Labour parties to have flawed MPs that they can blackmail into doing it. Because remember, there's nothing legally they can do to force an MP to vote in Parliament. Once you're elected, you can't be forced to resign. You only do it as choice. You are there for 5 years. And you can act on your conscience. And if the whips have something over you, then you're likely to be much more of a corrupt politician there. So I think you're spot on there. I think that's something that needs to go. Another thing that I think would help improve things in Parliament is a removal of the economic incentives. No second jobs, no extremely high salaries. You get the mean salary within society. That is what you do if you are an MP. You are not allowed to earn external amounts there, but you are given enough to subsist, food, clothes, and support your family. That's enough. And that.
I disagree. I think they should be paid well. I do. I think it's a shit job, and in terms of like, if you do it properly, you're going to put the real hours in. And I think you want to attract great people who aren't going to go, I don't want to earn 30k because I can go and work for that institution and earn 110 grand to be a consultant or whatever it is. So I have no problem with MPs getting paid really well. I agree on the second jobs. Take the second job out of it.
But Gemma, I have to say, and to you as well, Alex, this is what we've been doing for the last 50 years, and we've got shit. You could not get a worse selection than the 650 lazy, feckless, greedy scumbags that we have in Westminster at the moment.
They're not all like that.
No,
they're not
sorry,
all like
600.
that.
Let's say 600. You're right. There are ones.
I think it even might be higher. And I think that's where you get into dangerous territory, because there are some good people there on both sides. I hate to say it. But this particular 2019 intake is like grim as, of course. They are. But there's still within that some people who are okay, and I think we've got to be really careful with that kind of discourse, but anyway, it's interesting. We can agree to.
Sorry to say, we're out. That's the hour gone.
But at least we got a real bit of controversy in the end there, and a real difference of opinion. So we worked an hour to find it. So.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank all of you.
Thank you, guys.
All hail the lamp.
Bye-bye.
All hail the lamp.
All hail the lamp.